Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Hubinar by Nonprofit Hub. I am Randy Hawthorne, the executive editor here, and today we have with us Alice Ferris, and I am looking at a green dot on a screen because my computer setup is weird today, and Alice has also outed me that I am just wearing a t-shirt.
Oh, well.
But I was telling Alice that I am really looking forward to listening to her presentation because I feel personally, as an organization, we kind of got through the first phase of the conversations that we're having, and now it's time to kind of have a new phase of what we're talking about. So I'm going to turn off my camera so that I can feverishly take notes as Alice talks to us about fostering a growth mindset in difficult times. So take it away.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I have been kind of obsessed with a growth mindset for last couple years, and it's been really interesting to see how concepts of growth mindset and ideas about how to maintain a growth mindset in your organization have changed during this coronavirus crisis. So we're going to talk today a little bit about fostering a growth mindset in difficult times. And before we get too far into all of this topic, I wanted to share with you a quote that you may have seen already, because this has been one that's been really popular lately, discussing Sir Isaac Newton. Yes, the guy with the apple falling from the tree and gravity, right? So in 1665, apparently he was quarantined for, depending on what source you check, either a year or 2 years. I can't even imagine. But he had to work from home essentially because Cambridge shut down thanks to the bubonic plague. So during that time is when he developed his theories of gravity, calculus, optics, and when he came back to Cambridge, having been quarantined essentially for at least a year, he submitted his ideas and within 2 years was a tenured professor at Cambridge. Really inspirational comment, right? Except for the fact that Sir Isaac Newton didn't have to deal with all the stuff that we have to deal with right now. I mean, Newton didn't have to deal with constant Zoom meetings, webinars like this one, kids at home, just the stress of continuing your job, preparing food, cleaning the house, cleaning to go outside, figuring out, do you shake people's hands? Do you not shake people's hands? Do you wear masks? Do you not wear masks? Homeschooling, all of these things Sir Isaac Newton did not have to worry about. So clearly we are at a disadvantage in our current state. And even as states and communities start to reopen, there's a lot of issues that we're still going to have to deal with in this, what we call the new normal. So thinking about all of the other things that we need to think about, how do we even begin to focus on something like a growth mindset? Isn't that something superfluous that you just deal with later? Well, I personally like this quote, which is, difficult roads lead to beautiful destinations. So we are on some difficult roads right now, but this is also a time when we've had the opportunity to really step back, to really think about what we want to do and how we want to learn and what contribution we want to make to the community at large. With that in mind, I'm going to cover some topics related to growth mindset that I think are relevant during our current time. And towards the end of the presentation, I'll talk specifically about some tips on how you can encourage a growth mindset within your team, even as you may still be working remotely, and even as we have all sorts of additional challenges that we're dealing with. So the topics I'm going to cover today are, first of all, defining a growth mindset. And then secondly, how does this mindset, how does a growth mindset help your team? And thirdly, how can you take this current time to cultivate a growth mindset, not just for yourself, but for the people that you work with and the people that you care about? So let's get into it. So first, a little bit about me. I've been a fundraiser since 1990. I own my company, Goalbusters Consulting, and we have a team that works with mostly small to medium-sized teams, or as I like to say, small and mighty teams. I'm a Wisconsin Badger on Wisconsin. And I'm really obsessed with productivity. I'm obsessed with learning. I'm a to-do list person. You know, I'm that person who, if I do something in a given day and it's not on the to-do list, I'll write it on the to-do list so I can cross it off. You know, if you're my people. And I also want to emphasize that I'm not a PhD in psychology. I'm not a sociologist. So really, I have no expertise on this at all, other than being a really passionate person about growth mindset right now. So I'm approaching this from a layperson's perspective and giving you some tips that I've seen that have worked with organizations that I've been in and worked with. So that's just my caveat as we go into some of these elements. So when we define a growth mindset, what does this come from? You've probably heard about it in popular media already. Mindset was a book that was written by Dr. Carol Dweck. She is a Stanford psychologist, so of course far more qualified to talk about this than I am. The latest edition of the book is from 2016, and if you want to get a quick summary of this, first of all, you could just Google it on YouTube because YouTube has all things. Or you can click on this link. I will send the PowerPoint slide to Randy after the conclusion of this webinar, so hopefully you can get access to it somewhere. Or I'll also have it posted on our website at goalbusters.net if you're curious. But her book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, really talks about the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. So what is the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset? Well, to quickly summarize what it is, the growth mindset is failure is an opportunity to grow. That's kind of the emphasis of a growth mindset. Whereas a fixed mindset is failure is the limit of my abilities. Now, think about the people around you. Think about the people that you interact with at work, at home, your family members. You can probably pretty quickly assess who you would put into the growth mindset category and who you would put in the fixed mindset category. Because a lot of these phrases will be ones that they use. Like, for instance, the growth mindset person is challenges help me to grow. So it's like, oh, well, that was really hard. That really helped me to grow. A fixed mindset person is when I'm frustrated, I give up. Now, the thing to think about growth mindset and fixed mindset is even though we all tend to skew towards one or the other, it doesn't mean that everyone is either 100% growth mindset or 100% fixed mindset. Depending on the areas of your life, you may be growth mindset in one area and fixed mindset in another. For instance, one of the areas where I am fixed mindset is in any sport that requires hand-eye coordination. Do not throw a ball at me. Please don't throw a ball at me because I have this fixed mindset about my ability to catch things. And so if you throw something at me, I will just flail. It's not a pretty scene. So in that particular area, I would definitely say that I have a fixed mindset as to my athletic ability. And then there are other areas where I have a very strong growth mindset. So again, just because it's presented as a dichotomy doesn't mean that we have only one of these things. It tends to be along a spectrum. If you would like to do a quick quiz about which growth mindset or which fixed mindset you are, there's a quick little quiz that you can take that is at blog.mindsetworks.com, and then it's what's my mindset. So if you want to go to that link, there is a quick quiz that you can take to figure out which mindset you are. But let me dive into just a little bit more detail so that we can see a little bit more about what these things are. So let me drill down into the fixed mindset a little bit more. Someone with a fixed mindset or a fixed mindset in a certain area thinks that talents are innate gifts. So when you are born, you have the potential to become fully formed with the talents that you are born with. So because you have a fixed amount of skill and a fixed amount of talent, failure defines you. So if you fail at something, that is something on your permanent record, and so failure is to be avoided. The other thing about a fixed mindset person is that they tend to have more of a black and white approach to things. So you either know it or you don't. And I think you can either identify things in your own life where you think, oh, well, I know that or I don't, or see people that you work with or people around you who feel that way about learning. And the other thing that is a curious element of the fixed mindset is that there's this sense of entitlement or denial. Now, what do I mean by that? Because that's one of those that isn't quite as obvious as the other elements. And the thing that I mean by that is that when you think about entitlement, there's this feeling that the world owes you something. And so if you have a fixed mindset and you have a sense of entitlement, if you have a failure, in many respects, you may approach it as, that's not that I need to change, it's that the world needs to change. The world is unfair and therefore my fixed traits don't fit within it. Or the world has changed and that's unfair. I deserve to have the world that I lived in before. So thinking about that in the current environment that we're in, sometimes the person with a fixed mindset is going to be exceptionally challenged during times of crisis because the world is changing around them. And during this time where we have unprecedented change, and as much as I'm tired of that word unprecedented, it's very true. We have unprecedented change right now. So people who have a very strong fixed mindset are feeling incredibly helpless, are feeling incredibly victimized because of this sense of entitlement. The other thing that sometimes comes into effect with a fixed mindset is this idea of denial. Because, you know, I'm perfect. I am a perfectly formed human being. My life is perfect, and I can't admit that I can do anything wrong. Because if my life is flawed, then I'm flawed. So I don't want to go down that road. Those things that I can't do, they must not be important. Or those things that I'm not good at, I just kind of ignore that those even happen. I'm only going to focus on the things that I'm really good at because I want to make sure that my life is perfect. When you think about that as well, considering our current time, that's also a challenge. Because if you're someone with a strong fixed mindset who wants to ignore things that potentially are going wrong in your life, there's a lot of things that you are potentially trying to ignore. So that's a high level of stress for someone with a fixed mindset. So again, if you are someone who leans towards a fixed mindset or know people who lean towards a fixed mindset, this time is particularly challenging. I am thinking about one person in particular who is a colleague of mine, one of the staff people at one of my clients, who is having a really challenging time during all of this. And she does lean more towards a fixed mindset. And we've had to change all the ways that we do business because of shelter in place orders over the last few months. Now, Arizona, where I'm based, is now reopened. But still, we're not going back to the office yet. And so she can't go back to the office yet. So we've changed everything around her. And she has trouble coping because she had learned a certain way to do things. And her fixed mindset said that was the only way that she could do things. So have some bit of compassion if you feel like people around you have a fixed mindset because they're being more challenged than ever during this time. So to pull a quote from Carol Dweck's book, in a fixed mindset, and she was talking about students in this chapter, obviously, students believe their basic abilities, their intelligence, their talent are just fixed traits. They have a certain amount and that's that, and their goal becomes to look smart all the time and never look dumb. So there's your framework on the fixed mindset. So let's dive into the details on the growth mindset. So with someone with a growth mindset, talents can be developed through hard work. So your skill comes from practice. And anytime you have a failure, that's just temporary because mistakes are a part of learning. So if you make mistakes, that's good because that means you are challenging yourself and moving forward. And because of that, learning is a process. So it's more the process that's rewarding than the end result in many respects. So this is the person who likes puzzles. This is the person who likes to try new things, who likes to experiment, and will just tweak things to every nth degree. And to pull another quote from Carol Dweck, it's in growth mindset, students understand that their talents and abilities can be developed through effort, good teaching, and persistence. They don't necessarily think everyone's the same or anyone can be Einstein, but they believe that everyone can get smarter if they work at it. So that's the growth mindset of things. So I'm not going to go in as much detail at this point because we're going to spend most of the rest of the webinar talking about growth mindset. But let me highlight kind of the key comparisons between growth and fixed. So in a growth mindset, no matter what your intelligence is, you can change it, compared to a fixed mindset where you can learn new things, so tasks, but you can't change your intelligence. On the growth side, I like my work best when I have to think hard, compared to the fixed side where it's I like my work best when I can do it well without much trouble. On the growth side, I can learn from my mistakes. On the fixed side, mistakes are to be avoided. And on the growth side, when something is hard, I work harder. On the fixed side, when something is hard, I feel like I'm not smart. The interesting thing about these two types of mindsets is that you can change over time. There can be people who have a fixed mindset who move into a growth mindset. And frankly, there are people with a growth mindset who can move into a fixed mindset. So it's not like you are locked into one of these for the rest of your life. Case in point, if thinking back to my high school days, which is incredibly painful sometimes, but I think about so many things where I was a fixed mindset person, because in many respects, I was the embodiment of the model minority. You know, I was the overachieving Asian American student. And in a school where there were very few Asian Americans, I felt like I had to be the epitome of that stereotype. I really had to be at the top of my class. So that piece about mistakes are to be avoided, and when something is hard, I feel like I'm not smart. That was really true for me in that portion of my life. And so I tended to avoid things that were hard. And my mom, in fact, I hate it when my mother's right, you know? My mom said to me at one point, because I had quit something, and she says, "You're just quitting that because it's hard." And she was right. She was absolutely right. And it has taken many decades for me to evolve to a position where I do try to challenge myself on certain areas. But there are still those things in my life where, of course, I'm just focused on, oh, if that's hard, I don't want to do it. So you, again, can be on a spectrum between growth and fixed, and you can change from growth to fixed and fixed to growth. Because there's an implication in the popular media, as well as an implication in, frankly, the title of this presentation. Is a growth mindset always better? And there's an implication that, yes, growth mindset must be better. That's not always the case, though, because we all have aspects of both. And if you are constantly in that growth mindset area, you are constantly trying to innovate. You're constantly trying to learn new things. And you don't really want that. You know, sometimes things should be done a certain way for good reason. And especially in times of crisis like we are in now, even though things are starting to settle into, as we say, the new normal, that sense of constant change can just be overwhelming, and it can be just exhausting. And it can lead to panic, it can lead to dissatisfaction, and eventually, especially with teams, it can lead to disengagement. So when people have too much change thrown at them, they just get, oh God, I'm done with this. I'm walking away from this. So thinking about that, you don't always want to be in that state of constant growth and constant change, because it can get really discouraging after a while. So it's not always better, but there are definitely benefits to having a growth mindset on your team. So let me touch a little bit about that on your team and a growth mindset. Now, there was a great article in the Harvard Business Review several years ago that was written by Andrew Nguyen, and he said, when entire companies embrace a growth mindset, their employees report feeling far more empowered and committed. A fixed mindset company, on the other hand, makes it harder for people to practice growth mindset thinking and behavior, such as sharing information, collaborating, innovating, seeking feedback, or admitting errors. So when you think about what side you would like your company on, your organization on, do you want to be able to innovate? Do you want to encourage an environment where people will admit their mistakes and seek feedback and use that to grow from it? Or would you rather that people kind of shove that under the rug? That's kind of the implication of the difference between a growth mindset company and a fixed mindset company. So the benefits of a growth mindset with your organization include all of these things, which number one is foster collaboration. Because if you do have a growth mindset and you don't feel like you have to be territorial with some of your things that you're doing for the organization, then it can be really advantageous. So that collaboration piece is going to be something that helps promote cross-pollination in your organization. Now, all of these points are from an article also from the Harvard Business Review from the May-June 2019 issue, which was titled, "Your Expertise May Be Holding You Back." And what these points highlight is something that Carol Dweck mentions in her book about the sense of ego. And typically, an organization that has a stronger growth mindset has less sense of personal ego and less sense of I have to prove myself to my colleagues. So that's just something to keep in mind as we start continuing to dive into the growth mindset element. The other thing about a growth mindset for your organization is that it does encourage that innovation and overall promotes higher achievement, even though it's not as much about the individual achievement. It becomes more about the achievement of the institution as a whole. The other thing that I think is particularly important for the environment that we're in now is that in many respects, a growth mindset supports a more inclusive culture. It supports people with different backgrounds. It supports people with different skills and abilities because everyone has something to contribute and no one is kind of that specific weak point. It's not like you point to someone and say, oh, you're the reason we're failing, or gee, this group of people is the reason that we're failing. It is really about how do we work together and learn from things that are weaker and learn from things that are stronger. So again, it's about learning as a process as opposed to the focus entirely on the end result. The other thing that it does is that it avoids the expertise trap. Now, this is what Jason Schneider, the author of the HBR article, was commenting on when he said, your expertise may be holding you back. The expertise trap is if you are someone with a fixed mindset and you happen to be really, really good at what you do, you tend to focus on protecting what you do because you're really, really good at it and you are an expert at that. So rather than do that innovation and that experimentation, which may lead to you not looking like an expert, in a fixed mindset company, you are protecting that thing that you do that you're an expert at. And because the growth mindset avoids that expertise trap, it also allows your team to be more responsive. So if things change, which they do constantly, more so now than ever, you can adapt and you can change what you do based on what the conditions are. So a real world example of this is an organization that is quite close to my heart. They're one of my clients, but it's also the reason I ended up moving to Flagstaff, Arizona in 1996. Lowell Observatory, which was founded almost 126 years ago in Flagstaff, Arizona by Percival Lowell. And it's where they discovered Pluto, which in Flagstaff, Arizona is still a planet. Thank you very much. If you go to the airport, there's a rug with the solar system on it and Pluto's still on it. We're very proud of that. But thinking about Lowell Observatory, this institution has been around for over 125 years. And I became their development director in 1996, and that's why I live in Flagstaff, Arizona now. And they've been a client for several years now. And they're, in spite of the fact that they're such an old and storied organization, they're a surprisingly nimble organization. And I think it's because they have an inherent growth mindset in their company. So when a growth mindset company is faced with a crisis, how do they adapt? How do they respond? In the case of Lowell Observatory, when COVID-19 was becoming a reality in Arizona, and the director and senior leadership of the organization realized that they're going to have to make some significant changes to the institution and the operations, they immediately challenged some of their core services. They didn't challenge their mission, they didn't challenge their vision, but they challenged the delivery methods they use to act upon that mission and vision. So for instance, Lowell Observatory is a scientific research institution. They not only have active research going on at the Lowell Discovery Telescope, which is a 4-meter class research telescope in northern Arizona, but they also have a very active public education program that in March of this year should have been having one of its busiest months of the year because it's spring break and people come to Flagstaff, Arizona, and they want to learn more about the cosmos. What they decided a full at least 2 weeks prior to the actual shelter at home rules declaration from Governor Ducey in Arizona, they chose to shut down the public program. And they also very shortly after that chose to shut down the research telescope. So you have a scientific research institution that's job is to research and to share that information with the public that suddenly can't research and can't share it with the public. So what do you do? So they immediately decided to think about, how do we serve our mission differently? How do we take the mission that we know we are committed to doing, that we've been committed to doing for over 125 years, and deliver it differently? And the other thing they asked about was, how do we reassign our talent? We've got a lot of very smart people here. How can we distribute the problem solving? How can we not rely on 1 or 2 or 3 people to make all the decisions that impact everybody? But how can we ask people to provide creative problem solving throughout the entire institution, from the PhD astronomer to the part-time educator? And they came up with some incredibly innovative ideas that they were thinking about doing. It was just one of those things that was on the long vision timeline. It was something they were going to do later. And all of a sudden, those changes were accelerated quite a bit. So if you look at the Lowell Observatory website at lowell.edu, you will see a whole bunch of live stream programming that they have instituted over the last 3 months. That includes STEM education for kids that are being homeschooled right now. That includes regular conversations with astronomers. That includes Cosmic Coffee, which is a weekly conversation with the director of the observatory about various topics. I believe the topic this week is talking to the Flagstaff Symphony Orchestra. So it's a wide range of topics. And they're again still talking about providing insight into the cosmos and sharing it with the public. They're just not doing it the way they were doing it before. So that's a good example of how a growth mindset company can respond to a crisis, because they really threw all of their talent and all of their resources at figuring out how to continue to stay true to their mission, but change the way they delivered it. So if you ask the people at Lowell Observatory, I would guess that they would respond a lot like the employees in a growth mindset company. And this comes from an article, again, from the Harvard Business Review from November of 2014, which said that in a growth mindset company, they're 47% likelier to say that their colleagues are trustworthy. I think that is worth it right there, right? 34% say they are likelier to feel a strong sense of ownership and commitment to the company. So higher sense of loyalty. The other thing is 65% say that their company supports risk-taking, so how can you innovate? And 49% are likelier to say that the company fosters innovation, so actually does innovate. So with all of those things, it seems like having a growth mindset would be a fantastic thing for your company, right? Well, there are a few cautions to keep in mind. So some of the disadvantages of a growth mindset is that sometimes growth mindset people think that anybody can do anything. And honestly, there are some situations where certain people just are not suited for a particular position. So in many respects, people with a growth mindset will err on the side of over-investing in someone who potentially is not the right person for the bus. So that's just a caution I would give you. I know I'm guilty of that myself. The other thing is there's a risk of distraction and frustration, because if someone's really, really invested in a growth mindset, they're constantly coming up with new ideas, and it can be like squirrel. So how can you make sure that you stay focused on the mission and vision of your organization? The other thing a growth mindset person will do and a growth mindset company will do is frequently try to do everything. It becomes very hard to focus in on particular strategies because you think you can do so many things. I know the productivity company platform that I subscribe to is a company called Asian Efficiency, which it's okay. I think that's funny too. But that's one of the things they talked about on one of their recent podcasts, was this idea of, at one point, Asian Efficiency was trying to provide all of these different products related to personal productivity, and they were becoming less productive. And they really had to force themselves to focus in on a few core services that ended up helping them become more profitable and helping them become more effective. So sometimes the challenge of a growth mindset company is that you're trying to spread yourself way too thin because you have all these new ideas and you have them too often. And so you end up saying, oh, I know we were investing in that for the last 2 weeks, but now I have this great new idea, so now we need to go over here. So that can be one of those challenges. The other thing that can be a challenge with a growth mindset company is that if you do have those people who are really, really good at what they do, that expertise trap that I mentioned earlier, and they're really, really good at something you need to have done, but you're constantly going in all these different directions, that person may be tempted to leave, may be tempted to go to another organization that'll be a little bit more stable and will recognize them more consistently. So those are just some things to keep in mind of having a growth mindset company that might be disadvantages, just words of warning. The next chunk that I want to talk about is, how do you cultivate a growth mindset? So let's just assume that you are someone who has a growth mindset and you want to encourage that in yourself and in others. Or let's just assume that you have an organization that you would like to move more towards a growth mindset, particularly in this time of crisis when there's a lot of things going on and you need to be a responsive organization. So how do you take the time to cultivate that growth mindset? Well, with this growth mindset, there are 4 stages that I would like you to think about as you try to encourage this mindset with other people and within your organization. And the first piece is something that I've already alluded to with Lowell Observatory, which is defining a clear vision and communicating it. So that's chunk number 1 that I'll go through in more detail in a moment. Then there's this idea of identifying and addressing needs for professional development, so investing in professional development. There's this other idea of creating mistake promotion zones, and I have an example of that in just a bit. And then also measuring based on improvement. So you're measuring based on the process rather than the outcome. So let's go through these in more detail. So let's start with the clear vision. The first thing you need to do in any type of change, whether it's encouraging a growth mindset or implementing other changes that are either imposed upon you or that you're doing proactively, is to define what's not negotiable. What's the thing that you will not budge on? What's the thing that's most important for your organization? For most organizations, that means revisiting your mission and vision and deciding what's core to you, what's most important to the way you function. That if you take that away, you will no longer be you. You will no longer be your organization. So what's not negotiable? And what's that bigger picture goal? As much as it's really hard to think long-term, I don't want you to think about long-term, that bigger picture in terms of timeline. I want you to think about it more in the impact on the world. So the big picture goal may be something that's long-term, maybe something that's short-term, but it's something that is inspirational and something that will motivate you or your team, depending on the context that we're talking about. Because especially in times of crisis, this idea of focus is really important. You need to cut out all of the unnecessary things in times of crisis and really focus in, really have laser-like focus on that bigger picture, on that visionary goal. Because what you need to help people do in a time of crisis is have confidence as well as provide leadership. So how can you do all of these things? It's about articulating that clear goal. Now back to Lowell Observatory for just a moment. One of the previous director, the director emeritus, Bob Millis, who was my boss when I went to become director of development for Lowell Observatory in 1996. He said this in the video that they shot for the 125th anniversary of Lowell Observatory. And I will admit I was really touched when he said it on video because he kind of choked up. And he said, when I was director and I was talking to the team members, I told them, you don't work for Lowell Observatory. You are Lowell Observatory. And that has led to a certain element that has been embedded in Lowell Observatory finally having words for me. Because when I worked there, you could tell there was that sense of the people being important. But the current director, Jeff Hall, who was a colleague of mine when I worked at the observatory many moons ago, get it? Jeff Hall, who is now the director, said as soon as all of the things for COVID-19 were becoming abundantly obvious, he was seeing the handwriting on the wall. The first thing that he used as a mantra was people come first. And that's what guided him in maneuvering the decisions that he had to put the company through over the last several months. So for him, people came first. And that ties back to his predecessor, Bob Millis, of you are Lowell Observatory. So if that's the big vision, then he could think more about how are we going to solve the problems around that, with the emphasis on no matter what we do, people come first. So the next part that I want to touch on is this idea of promote professional development. Because, we're in a time, most of us are still at home, and most of us have a little bit more available time to do things like, I don't know, a webinar on growth mindset. And we really have an opportunity here in many respects. And one of the clients that I spoke to a couple weeks ago, when I said, are you thinking about doing some training? And he's immediately responded back with, this is a perfect time to do training because we have some available capacity to be able to do things. So whether it's a time of crisis or not, if you want to cultivate a growth mindset in your organization, set professional development expectations. So everyone should be, in some respect, required to do a level of professional development every year. And I know under normal circumstances, professional development is often the first line in the budget to be cut. But nowadays, there are a ton of free professional development resources. I was on 2 webinars this morning before this webinar. So there are so many opportunities to learn and grow. So set some level of expectation that your team can and should invest in some type of professional development every month. The key to making that really stick within the organization, though, is encouraging sharing. So it's not good enough that you attended this session, but what you need to do then is go back and share it with the rest of your team, or share it with other people that aren't participating in this webinar right now. So how can you encourage that? How can you encourage that sharing? So back to Lowell Observatory for a moment. Their team right now, their development team is roughly 9 people, I believe. And the major gifts team has a weekly check-in. So there's 5 of them on that call. And on their weekly call, they talk about how do we want to talk to our donors? How do we want to cultivate new gifts? How do we want to do all those things that we do as a major gifts team, but have to change thanks to COVID-19? But what each person has been doing is that if they've attended a webinar that week, they will share their key findings from that webinar that are applicable to the program with the rest of the team. And when we had a team meeting earlier this week, it was really cool because immediately the essentially VP equivalent of the team said, "Oh, Bruce shared this thing last week on our weekly check-in call, and I want to act on that right now." And we spent, a good 15, 20 minutes talking about how we were going to act on that finding he learned in a webinar he attended last week. So if you encourage that sharing, it reinforces the fact that the professional development that people are doing has some kind of outcome that has a contribution to the overall success of the team. So encourage that level of sharing and reinforce it when someone does share it. The other thing to consider about professional development is, what kind of gaps do we have in our skills? Even though you may have the best recruited, best trained team in your entire community for your organization, there will be changes and there will be skill gaps that evolve. For instance, how many of you thought you would be this good at doing Zoom meetings 6 months ago? So there are certain things that come up where you need to learn new skills. So every now and then, I would say on a monthly basis nowadays, but previously I would have said on a quarterly basis, do an assessment of your team. And where are those skill gaps? Where are those things where it would be good to invest in some professional development? And then, if you can, invest in it. And once again, there are so many free or inexpensive options nowadays, particularly since everyone's doing things by webinar, that you really can't afford now more than ever to really invest in your professional development. One example that I would like to give you is this book, which is another one of my new obsessions. It's a book called Marketing Rebellion by Mark Schaefer. And you can see the tagline on the screen, "The most human company wins." I'm in love with this book right now, and I love it so much that I decided to start a book study on it with one of my clients. So this client I actually provide outsourced development for. So I serve as the development director for this team, and I am the supervisor of 2 staff people for this organization. And so we've started this as a book study. They all have a copy of the book that I've provided, and we're going through and we're talking about the principles in the book because we have a daily Zoom check-in. And often there are not urgencies that we need to address that day. But we can take some of that time that's already built into our schedule to talk about how we can learn from the principles in this book. So again, that's encouraging professional development and also facilitating it, making it possible for people to do that professional development. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is creating mistake promotion zones. Now, this is where you have strategic risk tolerance. I don't want to see you do this to your program. I don't want to see you take every single initiative that is actually working for you right now and just chuck it. We're going to innovate like crazy and we're just going to reinvent the wheel completely. I don't want you to do that. But what I do want you to do is select a portion of your program where you can take strategic risk, where, we can experiment a little bit in that area, because you essentially have determined that a particular area will be a low risk loss, so to speak. If things go completely badly, it won't mean the end of the world for your organization. And if things go well, think about it conservatively. What is kind of the bare minimum that, if this went really well, here's this little teeny amount I think we could raise. Or if this went really, really well, here's this teeny bit I think it would improve the way we do things. So just assume in this area where you have decided you have strategic risk tolerance, that whatever wins you have will be modest. And if things go completely where, it'll be fine. So in many respects, you're treating this like an innovation lab. How can you use a particular part of your program to really focus your innovation? The example I have of this is a real project that we did for EAA, which is the Experimental Aircraft Association. And they're based in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and they have an overall membership, active membership of about 150,000 members of people who are both pilots or aviation enthusiasts or home builders or just people who love watching airplanes. So with the day of flight, what we did was that we set aside a day, a 1-day period that we wanted to do an on-air concentrated online fundraising campaign. With that 1 day, which was last December, we chose the anniversary of the Wright brothers flight for the day of flight. And we had a challenge grant, and we had social media posts and videos that were ready to go that we were implementing out throughout the entire day, as well as a very, very concentrated email campaign. So in many respects, this was our Giving Tuesday, but not our Giving Tuesday because it wasn't on Giving Tuesday. So this was our 1-day giving day that we were going to try to activate those members that hadn't contributed to the EAA Foundation previously. We ended up having what we jokingly called Command Central or the War Room, depending on the mood at that hour. We took over a conference room just outside of the president and CEO's office, and we had about 10 people in the room throughout the entire day. Someone with social media, someone with marketing, couple people from the foundation, couple people from design, someone who was in charge of the website, that sort of thing. And these were all people who were given authority that day to make changes to the website, to make changes to the email campaigns as they went out, and really make changes on the fly, which we did. At one point, we completely chucked our last 2 email messages for the day and really changed who we were going to send it to and the tone of the message. And we ended up getting a nice burst of gifts just by making that really quick on the fly change. So the main thing about the day of flight was that the EAA Aviation Foundation has not been doing a whole lot of online giving in the past, has not done a whole lot with email campaigns for donations in the past. And we said, let's just throw everything at it for 1 day and see what happens. Our goals were pretty modest. I think we had a goal of roughly about $10,000 for one portion of the campaign and another $20,000 for another portion of the campaign. We did have a couple people who were saying, let's raise $100,000, but we pretty much adjusted that down relatively quickly. But we knew that worst case scenario, we'll get a little bit in and we won't break anything really. So this was our strategic innovation zone. It was the, how badly could this turn out? And it ended up turning out pretty good, actually. So that's the idea of strategic risk tolerance. It's about having that mistake promotion zone. So then the last chunk for this particular part of the presentation is measuring based on improvement. What you need to become is less defensive about mistakes. It's not the, oh my God, no, I didn't do that. No, it's not my fault, it's your fault. It's really about how can we learn from this? So in healthcare, they do a lot of, well, postmortem is a very bad way to phrase it, but they essentially do analyses whenever there are any medical errors or any challenges that happen within a hospital setting, in a healthcare setting. That's what you need to do for your own organization. If something goes wrong, frankly, you can't go back in time and make it not go wrong. If something's gone wrong, it's gone wrong. Then if you have a growth mindset organization, however, you can think about it as, how can we learn from this? How can we figure out how to change things to make it not happen again? And what that does is that it reinforces improvements. So if you figure out after something goes badly that here are the things that we can improve based on this experience, you give credit for the improvements. You say, that's great that we figured that out, that we had the ability to improve the way we do things. Now, the example I want to give for this is something that is kind of odd, and that is clicker training. And you're thinking, what does dog training have to do with a growth mindset? Well, I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but there was a story on one of my favorite programs, Hidden Brain from NPR. They did it was a podcast that I listened to in June of 2018, which was called When Everything Clicks. And this story from Hidden Brain interviewed a trainer in healthcare who also happens to be a dog trainer. who decided to test out some of the things that he did in dog training with training surgeons. Kind of odd, huh? But what he discovered was that when you take things away from this idea of value judgment, so if you're not saying to people, that was really good, congratulations, and instead you're just clicking when they do it right, he discovered that people were more prone to repeating. Because if you've said, you know, that was great, you did a really good job on that, sometimes you want to stop, you want to quit while you're ahead. But if it's just a click, confirming that that was correct, that was correct, that was correct, sometimes you just keep doing it over and over and over again. So again, it becomes less judgmental. It takes that judgment out of both good and bad. If you do it wrong, you don't get a click. If you do it right, you get a click. So I would encourage you to listen to that, because the subtitle of it was The Power of Judgment-Free Learning. So how can you create an environment where people want to practice, where people want to learn new things and don't feel like they're being judged when they make mistakes? So how do these all interact? Because you're going to have people with growth mindsets, you're going to have people with fixed mindsets. How do they all interface in your organization? One of the things to be cautious of is that current talent management systems are really biased towards that fixed mindset. It's that expertise trap. Current systems are really designed to reward those people who can stay in their lane and become really, really good at that lane. And that's not to say that that's a bad thing, because fixed mindset people know what their best assets are. They know what their best skills are. That's the thing that they are really, really good at. So if you have someone that you're managing with a fixed mindset, or if you are someone with a fixed mindset, try to place them or yourself in an area where you'll excel. Because we all need those high performers, right? We all need those people in our organization who are exceptionally good at something that needs to be done. The challenge is when that role doesn't need to be filled anymore. Then you're going to have a difficulty of how do you move that person into a different area. And frankly, you may lose that person, or you may need to give that person an opportunity to move on. But when you think about the things that you do have to do that are central to what you do as an organization, and you have someone with a fixed mindset who's really good at that, capitalize on that. Help them succeed in that area. And then use some of the strategies that I've already talked about to build a culture that is built on strengths. So how can we look at people's ability to innovate or propensity to innovate and put them in the right places to be able to do that? So just a little bit of commentary to wrap up about why we should be focusing on a growth mindset now. Well, we've hit the reset button. There is a meme going around on social media over the last couple of weeks that was everyone who predicted where they were going to be in 5 years in 2015 is wrong. And we've all hit the reset button, right? There's nothing about this year could have been predicted. So in times of uncertainty, if you are trying to plan moving forward, it's really hard to plan looking at external conditions. It's hard to say, here are the things we know, because frankly, there's not a whole lot of things that we know. But what we can control and what we do know are the human and physical assets that we have as institutions. So what do we have as assets, and how can we assess our own assets and kind of regroup and look internally as to what are our personal strengths as well as our institutional strengths? And using those strengths, how can we move forward? How can we plan for the unplannable? I was on the Individual Giving Virtual Summit on Monday that was sponsored by Bloomerang and also hosted by Agents of Good, which is an agency out of Canada. And Mark Phillips from Blue Frog Consulting put together this amazing presentation about the stages that we that we will mentally experience as part of quarantine. And even though we're opening up now, I think some of these things are still true. where at the beginning stages of quarantine, it was about entertainment. It's the, oh, isn't this novel? And gee, I'm bored. So how can we entertain ourselves? And then we moved into a stage, I think, of personal development. And that's what he commented on as the next stage, was that it's about personal development. How can we improve ourselves? And then we start doing things to combat a sense of helplessness, where after you've been in quarantine for a while, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I have so few things I can control. So you start focusing on, how can I do things that I can control? And then you kind of reach the self-actualization level of the, I'm in this situation, but the one thing I can do is help. And the one thing I can do is help others. So thinking about those, what a growth mindset does is that it helps people get to that self-actualized stage of this world that we're in, of the, how can I use my skills and help other people? How can I think innovatively about things that we're doing to help other people? So how can you help if you have a growth mindset? How can you help your team navigate this time? And I think a lot of it is putting into place some of the things that I've talked about encouraging a growth mindset. So to wrap up, to summarize what a growth mindset is all about, growth mindset helps people prioritize learning. A fixed mindset, those people prioritize innate talents. And again, no implied value judgment there, because it's either about the learning process or about the innate talents and skills that you have. So a growth mindset team can focus on being collaborative and innovative, but if that's unchecked, it can lead to distraction. So you have to be able to balance that. Talent management models that we currently have are really skewed towards fixed mindsets, so just be cautious of that as you evaluate people throughout this process. And then also, if you can create those mistake innovation zones, those growth mindset innovation zones, that will really help you with encouraging innovation in your organization and rewarding those people who do lean towards a growth mindset. So those are my takeaways from the presentation today. And I know I threw a lot of things into this short period, but if you have additional questions or comments or other things that you'd like to share with me, my contact details are on the screen, and I'm happy to interact with anybody through email, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, you name it, I'm on all of them. So thank you again for the invitation to be here. And Randy, thank you for being here and helping facilitate this session.
Oh, no, thank you so much. I can agree with you that when they were handing out eye-hand coordination, I looked the other way.
No, don't throw it at me.
All I'm getting so far in the question box is, this is wonderful. It's so validating. Great job. So someone said early on, I don't care what she's talking about. It's Alice talking. So.
Oh, that's Josh.
So it's great. I'm sharing this with the LinkedIn peeps, and then of course, is there a recording, which we will send out a recording for sure.
Great.
Wow, I can tell from this angle that I really need a haircut.
Another symptom of quarantine.
Yes. But thank you so much, Alice. This was so amazing, and I appreciated hearing from this. And it's challenging, my thinking, because I'm not too fixed. So I have to remember to bring the fixed people along.
Yeah.
And it's so true what you said about, like, when you're working with your team, so many of the tools are set for that fixed mindset. You're so correct on that. So I took a whole lot away from this, and I really appreciate your time. I know you're in front of the screen a lot right now, and so one more hour, it's so great to see your face, and and I appreciate you doing this for Nonprofit Hub, and I believe the 600 or so plus people that are here with us would agree. So thank you so much. Thanks everyone. Now go out and make some change.
Thank you.